Right, so the themes of Mice and Men are important and very stereotypical of John Steinbeck, the author. This writing novella, if you want to call it that, this actually became a Broadway show. It was actually on Broadway as a play. Um, it was very attractive. It's been very attractive to people because people can understand the dynamic between George and Lenny. They understand they identify with it in some capacity. And so, of Mice and Men, even though it's set during the Depression, deals with fundamental things in human nature that we still deal with today. There could definitely be a modern of Mice and Men if you think about it. Maybe not the same ending, but the same kind of themes and overtones. So John Steinbeck, he wrote in the beginning of the 20th century. And what he did was he relied upon, he wasn't necessarily a modernist, even though he fit into that modernist category of nothing matters. He was more of a naturalist. So when we actually have class, you're going to learn that the different American writing movements started with the Puritans, obviously. And then a direct reaction to the Puritan writing movement was transcendentalism. And then the direct reaction to transcendentalism is something called naturalism or realism. And basically, the concept of realism is that nature controls all. You're this little speck in the middle of something, and nature totally will have its way with you. And in a way, the overarching images and the repeated imagery that we see in Of Mice and Men is the landscape and how that never changes regardless of what's happening to the characters in the book. It's a similar theme that comes up in a lot of Civil War literature where, for example, Stephen Crane's Red Badge of Courage, which is about the Civil War, whenever there's a major battle going on, his gaze of for the reader, or like the camera, if you will, that the words give you, goes back to the environment and how it's the same. Nature stays the same. Nature isn't affected by the human issues that we have. So this whole idea of naturalism is important, and the depth of the character development, especially with George and Lenny. But I will say that all the characters that Steinbeck reveals with dialogue are deeply created. There's a lot of dynamics that you can go with. Curly's wife is the only female character in this book, and that is interesting if you look at it from a feminist point of view, because she's kind of like this possession of Curly's. She's not even a person. But Steinbeck's dialogue creates her persona and actually gives us a depth of what her loneliness and what she has to deal with. And you actually feel sorry for her because she doesn't have it in control. Her environment, this is the best that her environment could produce. Pay attention to the nature that's in there, the natural environment, but also the concept of human nature. There's a lot of understanding with this text. There's a personal understanding where we identify. There's an interpretive understanding. And the American lives of men and women in the 1930s, I mean, it's kind of weird how things are paralleling in what we're going through now, but there's so many things, like for example, the Dust Bowl, that was the middle of the United States. There was a dust storm that went through the United States and knocked out all of the crops and everything. And if you look at the weather this year, there was actually a dust storm that came through the United States from the Sahara Desert, actually. It kind of traveled through. And then in Iowa, probably last week or like week from today, there was a hurricane-like storm that destroyed over 50% of their crops. And Iowa's main gross domestic product, if you will, is corn and soybeans. And they lost 50% of their crops. And so the weather for the Depression and for agriculture was very bad. It wasn't very favorable. The weather itself was very violent. There were a lot of tornadoes. There were a lot of hurricanes. There were a lot of storms that went through the Midwest. So it's kind of indicative of like how nothing was going for them. The last thing that I want to talk about is the American dream. When we look at American literature this year, we're going to look at that American dream and what that means, okay? And it's ingrained in us whether we like it or not. This whole idea that we can do better, we can go better to, get to a higher place. And so you're going to see a couple clips that, George is going to talk to Lenny about what's going to happen when they actually get their own place, live off the fat of the land. And it's almost like this fantasy of them being independent of being workers and other people's money. So this whole idea of making yourself better, elevating yourself, and how Steinbeck really doesn't have a very good outlook on that. And we'll discuss that as we go on. But look at how his perception of the American dream is, as opposed to if this was not a tragedy. So I hope you guys look at all those themes, and we'll be going over them with the actual movie from 1992 of Mice and Men, starring Gary Sinise and John Malkovich. Enjoy!